Michael, welcome to the Building and Growing podcast. We're delighted to have you here today.
Great to be here. Really great to be here. Good to see you, Lucas, as always.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And some really exciting news with your new position as co-founder of Aurem.
Yeah, it's really exciting. If you'd asked me probably a year ago whether I saw myself living in Abu Dhabi, founding a business, I don't think it would have been a yes, but I'm very excited by where we are.
It's fantastic. And, we're very lucky to be able to hear your story today and all about that move. But should we start off with, you talking us through your experience and what you were doing before this big move?
Yeah, sure. So immediately before this big move, I was working in the blockchain and cloud computing space. I decided that my former life of retirement investment savings was I was kind of done with it. I didn't really feel the excitement or buzz that I had before, and really wanted to stretch my brain. So I decided to sort of have a bit of a career change and learn something new. But prior to that, as I kind of just alluded to, I spent the best part of 20 years in the retirement and investment space. It's one of those things where I definitely didn't see myself having a career in that space, but very quickly realized, there's a huge problem here.
Yes.
And one of the traits that I have is that I love solving problems. So it was quite a natural fit for me.
Absolutely. And, I think that introduction was almost a bit humble, particularly in the pension space. The amount of work that you've done, I suppose, both at Smart, founding NextGen, and indeed as a trustee. You mentioned that you love solving problems, and you were solving, I suppose, multiple different problems from multiple different views.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, right? It's something that people always refer to or remind me of, and something I'm very conscious and proud of as well. But also the way that my brain works is kind of, I've done one thing and then I've moved on to the next thing and kind of compartmentalize them. But yeah, I guess, as you said, solving problems. NextGen was an idea that sort of sprung out of something that I felt was missing from the industry, giving people the opportunity to be mentored, giving people the opportunity to have a voice.
Yes.
Especially when you're younger and trying to learn an industry, like how do you gain exposure to people who can help and support you? With Smart Pension, again, that was a really exciting opportunity. They were at the forefront and probably still are at the forefront of technology in the retirement space. Helping that proposition get to where it is today was an incredible experience, and I've taken a lot from working there. As a trustee for NatWest, again, a new experience for me. I think I've been doing that now for just over a year. Actually, nearly 2 years. Time does fly.
Indeed.
But again, it's something that I'd seen throughout my career. I've experienced trusteeship. Felt like it was something that kind of didn't necessarily interest me because of what it was doing, but interested me because of what it could impact. And I wanted to, involve myself in something that could ultimately impact, thousands of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned before, 3 very different roles with huge amounts of impact across the industry. And, now you're going to impact a whole, I suppose, new region.
Yeah, it's the thing that's really exciting for me about the UAE is a couple of things. One is there's a real drive to create innovation. So the UAE is as an economy very relatively young and immature, but has really grand ambitions. So the opportunity to build pathways to create products that are going to serve an economy, but also hopefully act as a benchmark for the rest of the world, right? So that's the ambition in the UAE.
Yes.
Take what's been done, improve and innovate it, and then give everybody the opportunity to look back and say, okay, that's how things should be done now. This is the global standard. And that's what we're doing at Aurem.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I suppose perhaps it might be worth going with a top-down approach because Aurem's part of Further Ventures, which is sort of working on that that ecosystem within the UAE. Is that right?
Yeah, so Further Ventures is spun out of ADQ, so Sovereign Wealth Fund. The purpose is they are a venture studio. So they deploy capital into ideas, but they also validate signals. So a signal would be something that's occurred in another market. Does that have relevance here? Can we iterate, improve, or replicate that to the benefit of of the society in the UAE? So one of those signals was pensions. The landscape in the UAE is relatively young in that regard.
Yes.
There's the due system, which I know from my days at Smart, which operates solely in the DIFC in Dubai. The wider landscape for retirement and provision just isn't there.
Okay.
It's very much a spending culture rather than a savings culture. Probably because you get 100% of your salary into your bank account every month. But that's something that's been sort of recognised as needing to change.
Tell us about Further Ventures and the ecosystem that is being developed in the UAE.
Yeah, so Further Ventures is a venture studio. People may not be familiar with that model. Effectively, the way I would describe it is half venture capital, half innovation studio. So they are looking to find, create, validate ideas, and then invest in those ideas.
Yes.
Either post MVP or pre MVP. The way that I found my way to Further Ventures and the Aurem opportunity is they had an idea that they had begun to validate, got it to sort of a pre-MVP stage, and then we're looking for co-founders to take that idea and execute against it.
Yes.
They funded our venture, and then now they offer sort of ongoing support as we need it, as well as sort of acting as members of our board. I think the really interesting thing about that model is it's the sort of one of, if not the first of its kind within the UAE. And the opportunity there around investment is huge. I think people look at the UAE as being a wealthy nation, which it is. It very much is. But I think the thing is that there's a shift where they're wanting to create an economy that is self-sustaining.
Yes.
And they're also looking for external investors to help support and build that ecosystem of startups, innovation, and new products.
Yes.
It's relatively young still, which again is exciting, right? Because it means that you can take views from around the world as to what's working well and what isn't, and iterate. There's 10 million people in the UAE, of which nearly 90% of them are expatriates. That's huge, right? So I think the draw for people now, previously, I remember speaking to a school friend of mine, and she's been in the UAE for 15 years.
Wow.
She basically, her and her husband plan to go there for 2 years, have been there for 15 years. And incredible. The amount of times I've heard that story from people is incredible.
Yes.
It's very much kind of traditionally, and I'd include myself in this, been seen as a place where, you go, you make some money, you leave. Actually, the standard of living out there is incredible.
Okay.
The lifestyle is incredible. It's always warm, sometimes too warm, but mainly, beautiful weather, beautiful settings, very respectful, very safe,
yes,
and this blossoming ecosystem of innovation and startup. So it's the desire is very much to be a hub for innovation, a place for startups to sort of found and grow. And I think that's really exciting. That's really, really exciting, certainly to me.
And so we've spoken about Aurem, which is retirement focused. I know, we've got a couple of mutual friends at WEO, which is, doing a DTC sort of digital to consumer neobank, and I think they're entering the B2B side as well. What else is sort of in the pipeline there, if you're able to discuss it, of course?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that I think, that the real room for innovation is kind of infrastructure. A lot of the infrastructure in the UAE isn't, given the amount of money, like I said, number of expatriates in the region, there's still a need for sort of stronger, more refined, more robust infrastructure. So there are a few infrastructure plays that the studio have launched and will be launching.
Nice.
So that's one of them. I think the fintech space is relatively new. So if I look at, which is why I've always wanted to start my own business, right? I've always wanted and been looking for ideas. We've had conversations. I've had conversations with other friends who are close to me around starting a business. The UK is saturated. Let's be completely honest, right? There isn't a gap for anybody in the UK. You would have to find something incredibly niche to start something that sort of genuinely creates value, and that's not because there isn't value to be created. It's just incredibly saturated.
Yes.
That problem doesn't exist in the UAE, right? So, like I said, the opportunity that I see is go and differentiate, solve real problems there, then take that internationally.
Yeah.
I think if you can prove that with 10 million people, you're in a pretty good place, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not a bad start.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it sounds like a burgeoning tech space, and you're almost recruiting people in. Recruit the listeners.
DM me if you're interested in a job in the UAE. But I mean seriously, I think it's. I said this at the top, right? It wasn't something a year ago I would have ever said would have been on my radar. But I can't recommend it highly enough, and that's not that's not me selling it after the fact, although technically it is. But it's very much through my experience, through being there, through experiencing it. I couldn't recommend it enough.
Okay, fantastic. And so you've co-founded Aurem this year. Are you able to talk about where the product's at? I've had a look at the website. Looks fantastic. I love the calculator that's on there. Could you tell us, where you and the team are now and what the plan is?
Yeah, so we will be launching before the end of the year. We're very close to having a product that we can market and sell, being able to onboard our first customer. Our ambition is kind of threefold, right? So we're starting with workplace savings because that's something that there's a distinct need within the region, and there's a regulation that's likely to come in that will help impact that change.
Yes.
We see, the way that I see financial products, especially retirement, but broader than that, the whole gamut of financial products is they don't really work very well for people, right? So we're kind of in this place where people are putting a really good UI on an old product.
Yes.
So everybody is improving the experience, but the underlying product doesn't work particularly well.
Yes.
So the opportunity I see is, okay, how can we create something that can exist through somebody's life, help them achieve the outcome that they want to achieve, and do that in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So that's directionally what we're looking to achieve.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to see the product. Particularly if it's coming out towards the end of the year. I know we're filming now in early November. It's not too far away.
We will see how we go, but I'm confident that within the next few weeks we'll have a live product.
Yeah, fantastic. And in terms of, let's say, the target market, will you be focusing purely on, let's say, the UAE, and will the target businesses be private enterprises or state enterprises or both?
Yeah, so initially we will be focused on the UAE. We will be targeting the private sector. At the moment, because it's pre-regulation, we will be typically, our typical customer, our target customer will be large enterprises, because we know that they have capital to deploy. It's not going to impact their balance sheet. They're already provisioning for some sort of savings vehicle.
Yes.
Over time, as regulation starts to come in, then that will bleed down into the sort of smaller and medium-sized enterprises, just as we've seen with auto-enrollment in the UK.
Yeah, fantastic. And regulation is always a very important topic. You've had a lot of experience building products, but particularly products in regulated markets. Are you able to talk about how that impacts the, let's say, product life cycle and roadmaps, and really how you go from 0 to 1 in this case?
Yeah, again, I mean, I'll sort of talk about a couple of different examples and why I think the UAE specifically is a very exciting place. So typically regulation is a reaction to a product. So a product is released, maybe it doesn't necessarily take into consideration the consumer outcome in the way that it should, because people are selling a product rather than solving a problem, and therefore regulation reacts to sort of offer some safety boundaries or nets around the consumer. What that creates, as we've seen over the years, is 100,000 page regulation for a single product, which makes it really, really difficult to innovate, because you have to work within these really confined rules or regulations. What's exciting about the UAE is it's relatively fertile ground, right? So there's a huge impetus to protect the consumer. So starting from a very good position, but beyond that, there's lots of freedom to create products that actually solve problems. So I think one of the things that you see in the UK, you see in the US, you see in Australia as examples, heavily regulated products that aren't able to innovate because they've been built to kind of, it's like the walled garden, right? Like trying to find your way around the wall to ultimately give the customer what they want. The opportunity in the UAE is start with the problem, solve that problem, and then build regulation that supports solving that problem rather than just pushing products. I think that's a distinction that people need to make, and regulators need to understand, is sometimes regulation needs to be wound back. It's a very difficult thing to do when it's tens or hundreds of years old. But sometimes winding regulation back would actually be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And starting from scratch, you've almost got a blank playing field, let's say. And so it's going to be very interesting to watch that product develop with the freedom that you've got in, let's say, the UAE relative to other markets.
For sure. Like I said, it's not an uninformed market, so they're very aware of how regulation should operate, and it should support the development of like I said, products that are solving problems. But because it's not as mature, that gives you more freedom to be able to be more creative in solving your problems. And I think, specifically, if I'm looking at the problem that we're trying to solve, one of the things that works really, really well in economies that have a tax system is there are deductions that occur automatically through your pay. As I said, in the UAE, that doesn't occur. So there are no deductions that come out of your salary. So what does that create? That creates a situation where your behaviors, because we know that if people are given choice, typically they're pretty bad at making decisions, and when it comes to money, even more so, right? The typical person. But things like auto enrollment, for an example, they are creating a provision for people without them even having to think about it. They can opt out if they want to, but ultimately it's creating savings for people that they wouldn't ordinarily have. And I think that's the opportunity that we have in the UAE, is kind of acting as that sort of layer between employer and their money, and we can help them create those better habits, create savings, and then it becomes a whole of life thing where it's that automatic mindset of, I'm just going to allocate this amount of money towards my savings. I'm then going to see it grow, and then I'm going to see the benefit, rather than the money's now in my bank account and I have to make a conscious decision.
That's really interesting, because I think we've had a lot of discussions over the years about the defined contribution market in the UK. And in the UK, there are a lot of different, let's say, incentives for people to, put more money in their pension pots in order to, let's say, reduce their taxable salary. They're incentivized to contribute towards their retirement, whereas in the UAE, if you're not necessarily paying income tax, it does have to be a habit as opposed to an incentive, let's say. So I think that's a really interesting, it's going to be an interesting problem to look at, because you don't have the same levers that you had when you were operating here.
Yeah, I think I've always spoken about this idea of the concept of feeling like, what's the terminology that I always use and have now all of a sudden forgotten, the illusion of choice. So you talk about incentivization for saving into pensions vehicles, which we know, right, because we have operated in that space, we understand how it works. If you ask the common person, what incentives do you have to save into a pension, they don't know. Through conversations that I've had, through research that's been done, they don't understand the pensions landscape. I'm talking specifically about markets that I've worked in, so UK, Australia, US, and others. So what does that mean? It means that the behavior that actually they're exhibiting is, this is automatic for me. If we want to say this to like a macro level, if a government were to say from the second that you start earning money, let's say 10% of it was allocated towards saving for a house, 10% of it was allocated towards saving for a pension, 10% of it was allocated towards, I don't know, tax or something. That would be something that people would be familiar with, just in the same way that we're familiar with paying tax now, right? We pay tax, we pay national insurance.
Yes.
These are things that happen and we accept them.
Yeah.
They are deductibles from our income. If you had deductibles that existed across, the whole gamut of financial products that were ultimately going to positively impact your outcome, that would be a better situation for people because you don't have to think about it.
Yes.
I think, say we as an industry, we talk about the perks of a benefit. People don't understand that. What people want to do is they want to achieve an outcome.
Yes.
And I think there's a difference between, not wanting to speak in cliches, but known knowns and unknown knowns. So for example, I know that if I'm alive in a week, I'm going to, need food, or if I'm going to need to be able to, pay my water bill or whatever. Like, they're things that I can tangibly understand today. What I know, but I don't really think about is, am I going to be alive in, 30, 40, 50 years? If I am, then I have a need. But I don't know that that's going to be true. I could be hit by a bus tomorrow. So I think there's a bit of a there is, we know, right? There is a disassociation between today and tomorrow, or more accurately, the future. So how do we remove that barrier? And I think that's through a lot of automation and nudge. I think that's the way, you get people at the source.
Yes.
And that removes the need for them to think about it. They just need to determine what products again, loose term, but what products they put their money into, rather than whether they put their money into those products.
I really want to dive into the point you made about automation, because you've worked for one of the leading tech disruptors in the pension industry in the UK, and now you're building something from scratch in the UAE.
Yep.
So you've almost got a choice of whatever you want when it comes to tech stack now. But what I'd like to discuss is at least my view of the legacy tech stacks that exist in, and I'm going to use the UK as an example, but it's probably true as well for the US and Australia, in those markets where you don't have the same type of automation and real-time engagement that you're experiencing with other financial service providers. So, for example, if we think about investing, if you're investing with an app on your phone, let's say it's powered by Revolut or Freetrade or Robinhood, the chances are you're going to receive real-time engagement based upon your decisions that you take or don't make within the app.
Yep.
Whereas apart from, let's say, Cushion and perhaps Smart, how many times are people going to receive a push notification about their pension?
Yeah, I think there are probably a couple of things to unpack here. So the first one being, I spoke about it before, experience, right? So the thing that direct-to-consumer apps and businesses do very well is experience.
Yes.
They have an experience, and that's what draws the customer in. The experience may be the price, the experience may be the UI, it could be the customer service, but it's the experience that's kind of pulling them in.
Yes.
I think the thing that sort of the business-to-business model, which pension providers operate in, they don't really take care of the experience. They don't treat it the same way that direct-to-consumer do, because their model is, I'm not selling to the end consumer.
Yes.
I'm selling to the business. And then if you take that down a layer, you have this sense of ownership. And I've spoken about this a lot over the years. It's something that I firmly believe is that if you have a business to consumer relationship, the sense of the consumer is, this isn't my product.
Yes.
I don't own it. Somebody else has made a decision for me and now I'm suffering it. So, if you tie those 2 points together and try and unpack the problem is, I want to achieve an outcome, whether I know it or I don't. There's still a need, right? But the experience that I'm getting through a product that somebody else has chosen isn't good. It's not a good experience. Whereas the opportunity that I see is the business to business relationship is the strongest one because it's like at source, as I said before. I as a consumer don't have to make a decision.
Yes.
Somebody else is making that decision for me. If I have that relationship and I have a really good experience to the end consumer, all of a sudden that's a completely different relationship.
Yes.
And I think from a technology perspective, like I said, experience is something that can be taken care of better than it's currently being done on a business to business level. And I think that's kind of where the industry is particularly lacking. I think B2B, like you said, from what I've seen, Cushion have done a pretty good job. Smart did a pretty good job. But there's tons of opportunity to sort of create that product that gives first class experience.
Yes.
But on a business to business level. So yeah, I think that's where the improvement needs to be had, and I think a trick is almost missed in that business to business relationship, and realizing, sure, it's a difficult sell, but if you do a really good job in that space, and then you offer kind of like a whole of life product to the end consumer, I can take this with me and I can use this to consolidate and all of these other things. That's a fantastic product.
Yes.
That's a fantastic business, but most importantly, it's a fantastic experience that you're solving for the end consumer.
That's a really good way of looking at it, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it is the consumer's financial outcome which should be front and center and key. And so, making that relationship or that journey easy for the business as well, so that they know that the consumer is more likely to achieve their financial outcomes, is really important. So
For sure.
very excited to see what you come up with the team.
Yeah, we're doing our best, and we will give it a good nudge at kind of fulfilling or filling that gap.
Earlier on, we touched upon next gen and the idea of providing mentorship and a community for young people working in the pensions industry. For those who may not have considered the pensions industry before as a career path, what would you say to them?
I mean, I think everybody who works in the pensions industry would almost think of it as a poor relation to banking, right? Like that's kind of it's if you kind of didn't make the grade in a tier 1 bank, maybe you've fallen down into pensions or wandered into it by accident. And I think it's a dated view on the world. Like pension assets they make up a large proportion of global assets, right?
Indeed.
They're an incredibly important part of society because, these systems are created to see people live well in retirement, or at least be able to get by in retirement.
Yes.
Aspirationally, we want people to be wealthy and be able to live their best lives in retirement. But having that kind of, for me, my realization, as I sort of said at the beginning of this, right, is pensions are solving a huge problem. I still remember now from like my first year in pensions, I was doing an exam. I can't remember which exam it was, QPA or something like that. But it spoke to it was DB pensions, and it was speaking to the liabilities of European countries and how Italy was hugely underfunded, and I can't remember which other country it referenced. But it causes a huge problem, right? Like if people don't have enough money to retire on, then it causes a huge strain on the economy and governments to sort of provide for their society.
Yes.
So if you think about it from that perspective, you're solving a problem. For people who and people who will ultimately be important to you and ultimately yourself in the future.
Yes.
So I think it needs to be reframed in that perspective of like you're solving a genuine problem for people. And I think quite often people in their careers a lot of people want to be solving problems for people. So I think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yes.
Secondly, there are so many different roles within the industry. I even just look at myself and the experience that I've had. I've done a number of different things throughout the pensions industry. I've tried and I've failed, and I've done and I've learned. And I think the freedom that you have if you have a good network, which NextGen has obviously helped create.
Yes.
But also push yourself into roles. I mean, you're exactly the same, right? Like if I look at your path, you didn't start in pension, like you you're very familiar with the Australian system.
Yes,
Had deep knowledge, acted as a member nominated trustee. Found your way through into into the pension space and then beyond.
Yes.
But I know that it's something that you're passionate about as well, right? So it presents lots of opportunities to solve problems, but also do different types of roles.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I suppose let me respond briefly to your point about my experience as well, because that's really how we met. I think our first conversation was with the Association of Member Nominated Trustees and NextGen. I think we were talking a lot about how millennials and younger generations retirement outcomes would be affected by issues such as climate change, which back then was a conversation that sometimes would get started at the table and then ended, whereas now more and more I think people are understanding the true cost of climate change and how much it will impact people's lives as well as their investments as well. And so I think that's something that we spoke about and bonded about, and I feel very passionately about investments being aligned with macroeconomic trends and things which are going to happen. But the other point that I worried about as well in the UK when I moved here was when I was working in Australia. I think with the employer by itself, they were putting somewhere between 9 to 11%, depending on what was required by the government at that time. I moved to the UK, and at the time, I think auto enrollment, the minimum was about 4%. Mm-hmm. And so I just remember thinking, if I work my whole life here and then I retire, my friends in Australia who follow the exact same career because of the auto enrollment requirements are going to have a lot more money than me. Yeah. I realized that will affect, I suppose, how, perhaps rich each country is at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent probably the last 4 years, something like that, working with people in the Australian market, gaining a pretty deep insight into it. And it's very much, it's the superannuation system is running for 30 years now, right? So it's well established, light years ahead of most other, probably any other DC market in the world in terms of, the system, how engaged people are with it.
Yes.
It's completely different to the UK in that regard. Like you said, creates a huge problem in the UK when people are under-saving and don't realise that they're under-saving.
Yeah.
But then you compare back to the Australian market and, there's still problems within that system, right? Like the way that people are not spending all of their retirement assets, so they're being deliberately cautious and dying without spending their assets, or don't know how best to utilize them. These are all problems that kind of are coming down the track for the UK, and I think there's kind of like this look over the fence and see where we can improve, but without the thought of it's more of like a how can we replicate rather than how can we do better.
Yes.
Because it's an unsolved problem, isn't it? We're part way there to creating systems that work for people, but it's not all the way there yet.
Yeah. I want to dive into now one of the key stats that I remember from my days in pensions, and it was that if someone would like to have 50% of their salary when they retire, then they should contribute 15% of their salary each month or each year while they're working. And the reason that I want to mention that is twofold. The first one is because I think it's a really good figure and calculation for people to know.
Yeah.
But the second one is just acknowledging now the cost of living crisis and the difficult economic conditions that we find ourselves in. It could actually be very hard for people to achieve that goal. And so do you think that the pension industry does enough to sort of highlight to people what they can do during such a difficult time?
I think, honestly, no. Being completely blunt, my experience of the pensions industry is that it's a bit of a walled garden, right? We don't think about the financial world, people's experiences within that as being a whole of life thing. We think about the product that we're selling and how we positively impact the outcomes for that product.
Yes.
This is why I think there's a bit of a breakdown, and there needs to be improvement in terms of how we create systems that help people through their financial lives. And you're starting to see some of that now. Like, as you said, Cushion are a really good example of that, right? They're trying to offer additional products that can support people in other aspects of their life.
Yes.
But we're kind of some way off. We talk about compounding very often, right, in the investment world, but we don't think about compounding of decision making. So if I make a decision today, how is that going to impact me tomorrow, and then what does that look like for the products that are available to me?
Yes.
If I'm saving for my pension but I'm racking up tons of debt, it doesn't matter how much I've saved in my pension. When I come to retire, I've still got a bunch of debt that I need to pay off. So there kind of needs to be a bit of a coming together of the world of financial products, and like I said, focus more on outcomes. What are people trying to achieve? That most people, average people, are trying to achieve the same things in slightly different ways, sure, because there are different salaries and there are different expectations. They live in different parts of the country or the world, but broadly we're all trying to achieve the same thing, which is, how do I make my life as easy and stress-free as possible? How do I make sure I've got food in my fridge, on my table? How do I make sure that I can pay my bills? And how do I make sure that when I come to retire, I have the equivalent? So that's the way that I think people, governments, regulators, businesses need to think about that end consumer is how can I support them throughout? Yeah. And I'm not even saying that that's something that one business should build, but I think recognizing that fact would be a really good place to start.
It doesn't need to be complicated.
No, it doesn't.
I think some people enjoy making things complicated so that then they seem like the smartest in the room or whatever, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's the most simple things which end up being the winners.
Yeah, I mean, like I always use the example of Money Saving Expert. Martin Lewis has done a great, like his the website is, no offense to Martin Lewis, it's not the best, right? The experience from a UI perspective isn't the best, but the experience from a consumer perspective is, what am I trying to achieve? I can go and find what I'm trying to achieve. What's the best credit card for me if I want to balance transfer? What's the best loan if I need to take a loan? What's the best bank account for a person in these circumstances? All of the information's there, and it's served in a fairly rudimentary way, but it's helping people to achieve something. That's why he's got 16 million subscribers,
huge amount,
which is incredible, right? And all he's doing is going, what's the outcome that an individual is going to want to achieve? And how do I facilitate that? He's not trying to do everything. He's not selling product. Well, I think he maybe is now starting selling products, but typically he's not selling products. He's redirecting to the best product for you. And I think that mindset would be better for a lot of businesses. I don't have to do it all. But I can help you do it all.
Absolutely.
That's kind of the goal.
Yeah, that's it. It also sort of slightly different, but reminds me of Revolut in the sense that, when they launched, it was, can we do it 10x cheaper or 10x faster than others? And so, although it was a digital experience, they weren't necessarily reinventing the wheel. They were just making the wheel spin faster and smoother, and everyone was so used to a clunky wheel that they were amazed. Whereas if you look at emerging markets in particular, which relied on mobile as a distribution channel, they've got fantastic mobile apps for the traditional or legacy banks, so much so that the fintech phenomena hasn't really taken off per se, because it was just already there at the beginning.
For sure. I think like Revolut are really interesting, right? And obviously you spent time there. I think they any fintech or startup can only look at those guys and say they've done something incredible. I wonder, I'm not in a position to be able to sit and throw stones, right? But I wonder where they going forward, because they are becoming a whole ecosystem. But what's the tipping point for trying to do everything, like you said, 10 times faster or 10 times smoother? How do you keep that going? I mean, you look at somebody like a Google, for example. You know, they started with one thing, they've expanded into many things, but they're not excelling in everything. And they quite often drop products from their product set because they're like, okay, we've tried that, we tried to be the best at that, we're not the best at that, so we need to stop that. And I think it'll be interesting to see where Revolut go in terms of are they going to end up with 1,000 products, or are they going to end up with 30, 40, 50 products they do incredibly well?
I was speaking to a co-founder of a fintech today, and one of the questions that they asked me was about how many people are using digital banks and neobanks as opposed to traditional banks. And I said, really, the metric that you've got to consider is how many people use a neobank for their everyday banking.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's ultimately the KPI, which distinguishes whether the banks are the winners or the neobanks. Because if you're spending lots of money on your card, that's all well and good. But if you're still then taking your mortgage and your credit, which are the more valuable financial products, out with the traditional bank, what does that mean for the neobanks?
Completely agree. It's like, the term that I've heard a lot over the past probably 10 years is wallet share, right? Like, you want to win wallet share, but to your point, like the most important thing isn't necessarily wallet share. It's like you said, where's your salary going? And that isn't, that obviously equates to wallet share, but specifically, where is your salary going? And, tying it back to what we're trying to do, we're almost trying to disintermediate the banks. That sounds like a really grandiose thing, right? But in the UAE, it's an easier thing to do because we're happy for your salary to go into your bank. You need your salary to go into your bank to pay for things that you want to your life, basically. But there are a set of things that actually you're trying to achieve. How can we be the person that you come to before you go to your bank? How can we help you save those assets, grow those assets, make it easier for you to achieve the goals that you have set without having to consciously make that decision?
I love that at source model. It's a really good one because I've seen other payroll providers or HR providers before, and please excuse me that I've forgotten the names, but they were looking at issuing loans through payroll, and that way they can just take the money out. I think in the UK they've got a similar concept, but for investments with the corporate ISA. So at source means that you never had to say goodbye to the money once it was in your bank account, so you never feel that sense of loss or FOMO, I guess, as they call it.
But I think if you look at a lot of those models in the UK, and it ties back to the point that I was making before, the experience isn't good. So for some of them it is, and for some of those that just focus on a niche, they have a good consumer experience. But for a lot of those sort of at source providers, the experience doesn't tie up to what the product that they're offering. The product might meet the need, but the experience then doesn't create that sense of, this is, for me, it feels like it's an employer decision that's being made rather than you as the individual buying into it.
Yes, absolutely. Michael, I think we've covered a lot today, and I suppose something that would be really good for the audience would be for you to share learnings that you've gained. So if you could give your 3 top learnings to, let's say, potential founders or operators within not just pensions, but say the tech industry, what would they be?
That's a very good question. My first one is you have to believe in yourself. I think that's the most important thing. I heard also something today around, confidence doesn't come from being confident. It comes from knowing that you can fail, but being able to brush it off and go again. I've one of the comments that I've had previously is that, Michael, you believe you can do anything, don't you? And no, I don't believe I can do anything, but I do believe that if I'm interested in something, then I believe that I can achieve the thing that I'm interested in. So I think having self-belief is a really important thing.
Yes.
I think another obvious one is find people you can trust. I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah.
My starting position is that everybody is rubbish, and then you know, I feel like I have a really close group of people around me who I really value and trust. And I said to you before, Lucas, I consider you to be one of those people,
so
right? But I think,
and likewise, it goes without saying, but likewise.
But having people you can trust, it just means that when things aren't going well, when your back's against the wall, you know that somebody will be fighting for you. You know that, you know, if you don't have the time for this, you can give it to somebody else, and vice versa, right? So I think having people around you can trust is really important. And I think be humble. Nobody's perfect, right? Like we're all going to make mistakes.
Yes.
That's a good thing quite often if you're learning from them, but being humble enough to say, you're not going to be the biggest brain, you're not going to be, you know, the hardest worker, but create a structure that allows you to know where your weaknesses are and sort of build a team around that. That's, for me, is very important.
Yeah, fantastic. Michael, 3 really solid learnings, and thank you so much, not just for sharing them, but for sharing your experience with us today.
Absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it, and good to be here. And like I said, see behind the camera.
Yes, yeah. Well, hopefully in a few months' time we can do it again over in the UAE. You know, post-launch, and dive into sort of what's next on the roadmap.
Sounds good. It'll be much warmer there as well.
Indeed. No jumpers. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thanks, Lucas. Really appreciate it.